right now, without thinking about it, your body has settled into a position you didn't consciously choose. Maybe one leg is crossed over the other. Maybe both feet are planted firmly on the floor. Maybe your ankles are tucked neatly together. You didn't decide any of that. It simply happened. And that is exactly what makes it worth paying attention to. Carl Jung spent decades studying the architecture of the human psyche, and one of his most quietly radical observations was this: the body does not perform. The mind performs. The voice performs. The carefully curated version of yourself that shows up in conversations, in photographs, in the way you introduce yourself to strangers, that is performance. But the body moves from somewhere older, somewhere deeper, somewhere that has never learned to lie. It moves from the unconscious. And the way you are sitting right now, the position your body found before your mind had any say in the matter, that is one of the most honest things about you that you may have never examined. Jung believed that beneath the surface of every woman is not one self, but many, layered, complex, sometimes contradictory selves, each with its own intelligence, its own way of moving to the world, its own gifts, and its own shadow. He called these structures archetypes, and he found that they don't just live in the mind. They live in the body. They shape the way you hold yourself in a room, the way you take up space or shrink from it, the way you sit when the performance finally stops and the real you settles in. This is not a personality quiz. This is something more precise than that. We're going to explore 5 sitting positions, 5 body languages that millions of women default to every single day without a second thought. And we are going to map each one to the Jungian archetype it reveals. Not who you are performing, who you actually are. Before we begin, I want you to resist the urge to adjust. Don't shift. Don't correct. Don't sit the way your mother told you to or the way you think looks most professional. Just notice what your body already chose. That is the only position that matters here. Here are the 5. One leg crossed over the other at the knee. The foot hanging loosely, the body angled slightly inward, quietly self-contained. Both feet flat on the floor, legs together, spine straight, hands folded or resting on the thighs, composed and deliberate. One ankle resting on the opposite knee, open, wide, taking up space without a second thought about whether that is allowed. Both legs spread apart in a relaxed V-shape, feet planted, posture easy, though the mind behind it is rarely easy at all. And finally, ankles crossed and drawn close together, knees nearly touching, still contained, everything held just so. Look at those 5. Which one did your body already choose before this video told you to think about it? Because that is the one we are here to talk about. If your legs are crossed at the knee, one draped over the other, the body turns slightly inward as though creating a quiet boundary between yourself and everything outside, Jung would have recognized in you an archetype that is rare and profoundly misunderstood by the world around it. He called this orientation the introverted intuitive. But the name that fits more completely is the visionary. You process the world through feeling before logic, through impression before information. You walk into a room, and you sense the emotional temperature before a single word has been exchanged. You notice the things that have no name yet. The way a conversation shifted 2 sentences before anyone else registered the shift. The unspoken things sitting in the center of a relationship that everyone is carefully talking around. The energy that precedes an event before the event has taken shape. You absorb all this constantly, automatically, without choosing to. People describe you as perceptive, a little mysterious, somehow always knowing more than you let on. What they rarely understand is that inside the stillness, inside the crossed legs and the composed expression, and the eyes that give very little away, there is an entire interior world running at full volume, a constant, layered processing of everything you have observed, felt, and intuited. You think in symbols and stories and sudden connections that arrive fully formed and leave you wondering how you knew. You almost always did know. The problem is that you have learned, often through painful experience, not to say so until you can prove it. Jung called this the gift of deep intuition, and he was clear that it is not a soft gift. It is a precision instrument, the capacity to receive information that exists beneath the surface of what is visible, to read the current beneath the current. When you trust it, which is not as often as you should, you're almost never wrong. When you override it in favor of what looks more reasonable or more socially acceptable, Things go wrong in ways that take you a long time to understand. But Jung always came to the shadow. And for you, the shadow of deep perception is isolation, because the world inside your mind is rich enough that you can survive there for a very long time without needing much from the outside. And at some point, surviving became a preference. The cross legs, that subtle, elegant barrier between your body and the room, is the body's way of mirroring the psyche's most practiced move, a quiet retreat from a world that has not always known how to receive what you carry. The challenge Jung would place before you is specific. Your perceptions are not decorative. They are not just for your own private contemplation. The insight you carry about people, about situations, about what is actually happening beneath what appears to be happening, that belongs in the world. It is not meant to remain inside you. Find one person, one space, one relationship where the barrier can lower slightly. Not fall, not shatter, just lower enough to let something real move from inside you to outside. Because a visionary who keeps every vision to herself is not protecting her gift. She is withholding it. And that is the only thing that can actually diminish it. If both feet are flat on the floor, legs together, spine upright, hands folded with quiet precision, and you likely arrive at this position without realizing it was a choice, then Jung would have identified in you something the world desperately needs and chronically undervalues. The archetype here is an architect, not the archetype of grand designs and public recognition, but the archetype of the woman who builds things that last. You think in sequences and systems. While others are still in the feeling phase, still deciding how they feel about a decision, you have already moved into the doing phase. You have broken the problem into its components, identified the two most likely failure points, and begun addressing them. Your mind works with the precision of someone who respects reality, who does not wish things were different, but deals with them as they actually are. You are exceptionally good at seeing what a situation requires, and then providing exactly that, without drama, without needing to be noticed for it. People rely on you in ways they do not always articulate because reliability, true reliability, is so rare that most people do not have adequate language for it. You are the person who remembers, who follows through, who when a plan is falling apart steps in quietly and holds it together without making it about herself. Jung described this as the gift of the sensing judging function, the ability to impose intelligent, lasting order on a chaotic world, not temporarily, not impressively, but permanently. You build things that endure. The shadow of the architect is the assumption that order is always the answer. For you, the world has a correct way and an incorrect way, an efficient path and a wasteful one. And when life, which is gloriously, stubbornly, beautifully unmappable, refuses to conform to your system, it does not just inconvenience you, it unsettles something deep. Jung called this the trap of the judging function, confusing the map with the territory, forgetting that the systems we build to understand the world are not the world itself. The people you love are not manageable. The emotions you feel are not schedulable. The moments that will matter most to you when you look back at your life will almost certainly not have been on your calendar. The shadow challenge for you is whether you can choose the unplanned thing, not abandon your structure, not become someone else, but allow one thing each week to run past its edges. Let a conversation go longer than it was supposed to. Say yes to something whose outcome you cannot predict, because the most important things in human life almost never arrive on schedule. If one ankle is resting on the opposite knee, open, grounded, taking up space as though it never occurred to you to do otherwise, the room already knows something about you before you have said a single word. The archetype here is a sovereign, Jung's warrior energy in its most developed feminine expression, not aggression, not dominance, engagement, full, fearless, unapologetic engagement with the world as it is. You have opinions, and you express them without waiting to see which direction the room is already leaning. You do not soften your positions as a reflex. You do not perform uncertainty to seem more approachable. You decided at some point in your life, perhaps unconsciously, that being genuinely honest was more important to you than being universally liked. And while that has cost you some things, you are generally clear on what you believe it has given you instead. High-pressure environments do not diminish you. They clarify you. When the stakes rise, something in you settles, focuses, sharpens. You trust your own judgment under fire in a way that others notice and draw toward. You make decisions when others are still deliberating. You move when others are still talking about moving. And because you take up your own space so fully and so without apology, something remarkable happens in rooms where you are present. Other women feel, quietly, that they are allowed to do the same. Jung described this as psychic courage, the willingness to meet reality as it is rather than as you wish it were. It is a genuinely rare quality, and it is expressed in your body before you open your mouth. The shadow for the sovereign is a moment when the strength that serves you in high-stakes situations begins operating in spaces that did not need it, in a conversation that was asking for softness, not strategy, in a relationship that needed you to be received, not just capable. The figure 4 position says to anyone fluent in body language, I am ready. But readiness in the wrong context can read as unavailability. As someone who is braced rather than open, Jung called this the inflation of the warrior archetype, when strength stops serving a purpose and becomes an identity so fixed that even tenderness feels like a threat to it. The challenge is not to become less powerful. The challenge is to know when power means opening rather than holding the line. The highest expression of the sovereign is not the woman who never yields. It is the woman who chooses when to yield and when not, to a complete clarity about which is which. If both legs are spread in a relaxed, open position, feet planted, the posture easy and unhurried, you're almost certainly aware that this is not how you were taught to sit, and some part of you has made a quiet, ongoing decision not to care. The archetype here is the explorer. Jung described the extroverted intuitive as a mind perpetually in motion, not necessarily in body, but in imagination, in possibility, in the constant perception of what could be. You are in this conversation and simultaneously already thinking about the idea it sparked and the project that idea could become, and the version of yourself 2 years from now who built something from this exact moment. You live in the forward edge of time. You walk into half-finished situations and immediately see their potential. You make connections between things that appear completely unrelated, and those connections are almost always more than accidental. You generate creative energy that other people can feel when they are near you. Conversations go further, rooms get bigger. Ideas that were sitting quietly suddenly have somewhere to go. Jung called this the gift of extroverted intuition, and he described it as one of the most generative orientations a human mind can carry. You are a natural visionary in the quiet, constant sense of always seeing beyond what currently exists. You do not need to announce it. It simply happens wherever you are. The shadow of the explorer is the long trail of almost finished things. Because the same mind that sees everything simultaneously often struggles to stay with one thing long enough to bring it to completion. The next idea arrives before the current one is cross-avoiding. That potential kept in perpetual motion never actually lands anywhere. Jung called this the pure eternus, the eternal youth, always in spring, never quite reaching harvest. And the shadow challenge of the explorer is the most direct one of all. Your vision is extraordinary, but vision without completion is just biography. What would change if you stayed with one thing, one single thing, imperfectly but fully, all the way to done, before the next idea arrived? Give it a container, not to limit what you are capable of, but to concentrate it. A river is powerful not because of its water, but because of its banks. Your ideas need banks. And if your ankles are crossed and drawn close together, everything still, everything held with quiet precision, nothing wasted, nothing on display, then what Jung saw in that posture was the most complex and the most quietly powerful archetype of all 5. He called it the magician. And in its feminine expression, it is a woman who understands how things actually work beneath the surface, who sees the levers underneath the visible mechanisms of a situation, who is already several moves into a game that most of the people around her have not realized has begun. You are quietly confident in a way that does not require an audience. You do not announce your ambitions. You do not need external validation to confirm that what you are building is real and worth building. You observe far more than you speak. And when you do speak, it lands differently than when others do because everything you say has been chosen. Nothing leaves your mouth by accident. People find you magnetic. They remember you with unusual clarity and often cannot explain precisely why. Jung described a magician's gift as transformation through understanding, the ability to change situations not through force or volume, but through the precise application of insight, delivered at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way. You are strategic without being cold, ambitious without being desperate, patient in a world that has become almost incapable of patience. The long game is the only one that actually matters, and you know this in your bones. Your emotional self-mastery is exceptional. In moments of crisis, when others begin to unravel, you find the still center and hold it. This is not suppression. It is not performance. It is mastery. And the quiet authority that emanates from a woman who is composed not because she is performing composure, but because she has genuinely built it from the inside. People feel that. They trust it, often more deeply than they trust louder, more performative expressions of confidence. And frequently they cannot explain why. The shadow lives here, in the seamlessness of the mask. Jung wrote about the persona, the carefully constructed face we present to the social world. For most people, it is slightly visible on close inspection. For you, it is perfect, and that perfection, over time, becomes its own kind of prison, because at some point, the mask fits so well that even you lose track of where it ends and the real self begins. The crossed ankles, the measured words, the composed expression, they protect you, but they also insulate you from being known, not admired, not respected, not found impressive, known. The quiet terror for the magician is not failure. It is the possibility of arriving at the end of an extraordinary life having been seen by almost no one. Jung's deepest challenge to this archetype is this. Who are you when there is no one to appear composed for? Have you met her lately? Have you let anyone else meet her? The long game you are playing, does it include another person? Or has it become, beneath its surface brilliance, a game played entirely alone? You do not need to perform openness. That would only be another performance. But find your one person, the singular human being for whom the mask can lower, not fall, not shatter, just lower slightly, just enough to let something real pass through in both directions. Because the greatest work the magician is capable of is never done alone. It is done in the presence of someone who is changed by witnessing it. Before you leave, I want to say something that Jung spent the last years of his life insisting upon. He was not interested in categories. The entire architecture of his psychology, the archetypes, the shadow work, the unconscious, individuation, all of it was never designed to label the self. It was designed to liberate it. Every one of these archetypes lives inside every woman. The visionary, the architect, the sovereign, the explorer, the magician, all five exist somewhere in complexity of who you are. The position your body defaults to when your mind stops managing it reveals which archetype is currently leading your life. Not all of who you are, but who is at the front right now. And that matters enormously. Because sometimes the archetype that has been running the show is not the one you consciously chose. Sometimes the sovereign has taken over in a space that was quietly asking for the visionary's patience. Sometimes a magician is holding everything so close and so perfectly that what the heart is actually asking for is the explorer's willingness to leap into something uncertain. Jung called this lifelong work individuation, the slow, quiet, honest work of becoming whole, of learning to move between these parts of yourself with intention, rather than being unconsciously driven by the loudest one. How you sit is a small window into a very large and very important conversation, one your unconscious mind has been having about you quietly, faithfully, and honestly for your entire life. The question is never which one are you. The question is which one are you ready to become.